There's a strange feeling that comes with riding through old places. Today, Robert and I are riding through Shelton Laurel, North Carolina. Quiet Appalachian roads winding through some of the most beautiful mountains you'll ever see. But these mountains carry a darker story. During the Civil War, 13 men and boys were executed here in what became known as the Shelton Laurel Massacre. Looking at those peaceful valleys today, it's hard to imagine that kind of violence ever happening here. Alexander Solzhenitsyn once wrote, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through every heart of every human being." Maybe these roads have something to teach us about that. Let's ride.
Oh, you hear that? You may not have heard that. If you did, you know what it was. If you don't,
The farther you get into Appalachia, the more the modern world starts losing its grip. Cell phone service fades in places, roads narrow, old homes sit tucked into the valleys beneath towering ridgelines. Time itself almost seems to slow down somewhere out there between the mountains and the rivers. That's one of the reasons I love riding these roads. You begin noticing things people flying down the interstates never see. An old church sitting beside a creek, a cemetery climbing up a hillside, weathered barns barely still standing after generations of Appalachian winters, small communities holding on to older rhythms of life while the rest of the world races past them. There's something deeply human about places like this, and there's also something haunting about them, because the mountains remember things. Long before motorcycles ever carved through these roads, these valleys witnessed survival, hardship, faith, violence, and sacrifice. Appalachia has never been a simple place. The beauty here has always existed alongside struggle. I think modern people sometimes romanticize the past because they've become disconnected from hardship. But life in these mountains historically was not easy. Isolation, poverty, brutal winters, war, hunger, loss. Entire generations enduring things most modern people can barely imagine. And yet somehow, communities survived. Families stayed rooted, churches were built, children were raised, fields were worked, and lives were lived. That resilience becomes part of the land itself after a while. Riding through Shelton Laurel, it's impossible not to think about that history once you know what happened here. In early 1863, during the chaos of the Civil War, Confederate troops entered this area searching for men accused of supporting Union forces, avoiding Confederate conscription, or participating in raids for food and supplies. Tensions in Appalachia during the war were complicated. The mountains didn't divide neatly along the same lines as the rest of the South. Neighbor turned against neighbor, families split politically, communities fractured. Appalachia understood civil conflict in an especially personal way because people weren't fighting strangers from distant places. They were often fighting people they knew. That's what makes civil wars so horrifying. Hatred becomes intimate. Eventually, 13 men and boys from Shelton Laurel were taken into custody by Confederate troops. Some accounts say they were weak from hunger. Some were reportedly teenagers. They were marched through the mountains and executed alongside a creek in Madison County. Even by Civil War standards, the killing shocked many people. And standing here now, it's difficult to reconcile that kind of violence with the peacefulness of those mountains. The roads are quiet now. The creeks still flow. Bird song echoes through the trees. Nature moved on. Human beings often don't. I think places like Shelton Laurel remind us how thin civilization really is sometimes. Modern people like to imagine themselves morally superior to previous generations. We look back at history and wonder how human beings could commit atrocities against each other. But history repeatedly demonstrates something uncomfortable. Under the right circumstances, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary cruelty. That truth unsettles people because it forces humility. Again, Solzhenitsyn's words comes to mind. The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. Not just bad people, everyone. That's deeply biblical whether people realize it or not. Scripture never portrays mankind as naturally pure and enlightened. The Bible consistently presents humanity as deeply capable of both love and corruption. Cain murders Abel only a few chapters into Genesis. Entire nations rise and collapse through violence, greed, pride, and vengeance. The Bible is remarkably honest about human nature. And maybe that honesty is one reason Scripture continues resonating across generations. Because people instinctively know something is broken in humanity. Riding through Shelton Laurel, I found myself thinking about how easily division consumes people once they stop seeing each other as human beings. The Civil War wasn't just armies fighting on battlefields. In places like Appalachia, it became deeply personal. Distrust spread through communities. Loyalty became suspect. Political identity became more important than human dignity. Honestly, it doesn't feel entirely unfamiliar today. Different circumstances, different conflicts, same human tendencies. Modern society feels increasingly divided in ways that are hard to ignore. Politics, ideology, social media, outrage culture. Everybody is constantly encouraged to categorize people into tribes and enemies. And once people stop seeing humanity in each other, cruelty becomes easier to justify. History proves that repeatedly. That doesn't mean all beliefs are equally true or equally moral, but it does mean hatred is a way of corrupting people regardless of which side they believe themselves to be on. That's why humility matters so much. I think one of the dangers of modern culture is how quickly people assume they themselves would have been among the righteous in every historical tragedy. Most people imagine they would have resisted corruption, resisted mob mentality, resisted hatred. But history suggests otherwise. Most people simply move with the crowd around them. That realization should humble all of us. And honestly, the mountains themselves seem to reinforce humility. There's something about standing in Appalachia that shrinks ego. These ridges existed long before our arguments, and they'll remain long after them. Human beings spend enormous amounts of energy fighting over temporary power while the mountains quietly endure century after century. Maybe that perspective is healthy. The motorcycles continued winding through the curves while those thoughts lingered in my head. The Harley rumbled steadily beneath me while Robert's Triumph moved smoothly through the mountain roads ahead. There's a rhythm to riding that almost feels meditative after enough miles. Not because motorcycles are magical, not because riding solves life, but because the road demands presence. You can't endlessly doom scroll while leaning through mountain curves. You can't obsess over every meaningless internet argument while watching the next blind corner unfold ahead of you. The road pulls your attention back into reality. And maybe that's part of why riding feels spiritually restorative at times. Not spiritually in the sense that motorcycles replace faith or church or scripture, but spiritually in the sense that silence and stillness create room for honest reflection again. Modern life rarely allows that. Most people are drowning in noise constantly. Notifications, entertainment, politics, work stress, comparison, anxiety, consumption. The modern world has become incredibly efficient at distracting people from deeper questions. Questions like, who am I becoming? What actually matters? Am I living truthfully? Am I becoming bitter? Am I becoming selfish? Am I growing closer to God or farther away? The road has a strange way of slowing those questions down enough to finally hear them. And Appalachia amplifies that feeling. These mountains don't care about status. They don't care about followers. They don't care about internet validation. Out here, reality feels more grounded somehow. Maybe that's why so many people feel emotionally lighter after time spent in creation. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." That verse becomes easier to understand in places like this. Stillness is becoming rare. Not physical stillness, mental stillness. And I think people underestimate how much consistent mental noise affects the human soul. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." That describes modern society better than people realize. Distraction has become a lifestyle. People move from entertainment to entertainment, outrage to outrage, purchase to purchase, endlessly consuming while quietly starving for meaning underneath it all. But meaning usually isn't found in louder distraction. Sometimes meaning is found in stillness, in reflection, in brotherhood, in faith, in remembering history, in confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves. And maybe that's part of why stories matter so much. Places like Shelton Laurel matter because they remind us of what human beings are capable of when hatred overrides conscience. But they also remind us of something else, the importance of mercy. Mercy is one of the most misunderstood ideas in modern culture. People often think mercy means weakness or moral compromise. Biblically, mercy is something much deeper. Mercy acknowledges justice while still recognizing human brokenness. That balance is difficult, especially in divided times. I think one reason Christ's teachings remain so radical is because forgiveness directly opposes human instinct. Human beings naturally gravitate towards vengeance, pride, tribalism, and self-righteousness. History proves that repeatedly. But Christ consistently calls people towards humanity instead, towards loving enemies, towards forgiveness, towards recognizing personal sin before condemning others. That doesn't mean abandoning truth. It means abandoning hatred. And honestly, that distinction may matter now more than ever. The road continued carrying us deeper through Appalachia while those thoughts unfolded naturally alongside the curves and the ridgelines. Creeks shimmered beside stretches of road hidden beneath thick canopy, and it struck me how peaceful these mountains feel now compared to the violence they once witnessed. Time softens places eventually, but history still lingers beneath the surface if people are willing to pay attention. I think modern Americans often suffer from historical amnesia. People live disconnected from the sacrifices, sufferings, and complexity that shape the places around them. Roads become just roads. Towns become just names on maps. But every place has stories buried beneath it, some beautiful, some tragic. Appalachia especially carries layers of both. There's a toughness to mountain culture that didn't emerge accidentally. Generations here endured difficult terrain, economic hardship, isolation, and conflict. But alongside that toughness came strong family structures, deep-rooted faith traditions, resilience, and community bonds. That complexity is what makes Appalachia fascinating. It refuses simplification. And maybe people are the same way. One thing I've noticed about modern culture is how badly people want simple villains and simple heroes. Clean narratives, easy categories, and absolute certainty about who the good guy is. Reality is rarely that clean. Human beings are complicated. Even in Shelton Laurel, history itself remains debated in some ways depending on perspective, allegiance, and interpretation. That doesn't erase the horror of what happened, but it does remind us how difficult truth can be during conflict. There's another reason humility matters. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that's above you." Pride blinds people. Natural pride, political pride, personal pride, and spiritual pride. History repeatedly shows how pride distorts judgment. And honestly, motorcycles can be strangely humbling too. The road has no respect for arrogance. Skill matters, awareness matters, experience matters, but ego gets punished quickly on two wheels. That humility is healthy. The mountains teach it too. There's something spiritually grounding about realizing how small you are beneath landscapes like these. Not insignificant, just properly scaled. Modern culture consistently inflates itself. Everything revolves around personal identity, personal expression, personal validation, personal opinion. People are taught to view themselves as the center of existence. But creation has a way of restoring proportion. Standing in Appalachia, you remember, you are temporary, you are human, you are flawed. You are part of something larger than yourself. And strangely enough, that realization often brings peace instead of despair. Because people were never designed to carry the weight of being their own God. The further we rode, the more the rhythm of the road settled into something almost timeless. Curves unfolded naturally, the motorcycles hummed steadily beneath the mountains. There's a point during long rides where thought itself changes pace. Slower, clearer, more honest. Maybe because the road strips away excess. No endless scrolling, no performance, no curated image, just movement. And movement has always mattered deeply to human beings. Pilgrimages, journeys, wilderness wandering, exploration. Even scripture repeatedly uses roads and journeys as metaphors for spiritual life. Because movement changes people. Not always physically, sometimes internally. I think many men especially feel trapped in repetitive modern routines that slowly disconnect them from deeper parts of themselves. Wake up, work, bills, screens, sleep, repeat. There's nothing wrong with responsibility. Responsibility gives life meaning. But human beings also need wander occasionally. Adventures, stillness, perspective, beauty. Not constant stimulation, real beauty. And Appalachia offers that naturally. Not polished beauty, not artificial beauty, real beauty. Ancient beauty, hard beauty. The kind that existed before modern comfort softened everything. As we rode through Shelton Laurel, I kept thinking about how places simultaneously holds sorrow and peace. That's true for landscapes. It's also true for people. Some of the strongest people you'll ever meet are carrying old grief quietly. Veterans understand that well, so do first responders, so do parents, so do some people who have simply lived long enough to experience loss. Human beings learn to carry things, sometimes gracefully, sometimes poorly, but eventually everybody carries something. And maybe that's another reason brotherhood matters. You don't always need someone to solve your burdens. Sometimes you simply need people willing to walk beside you, honestly, while carrying them. Motorcycles create space for that kind of companionship. Not forced emotionalism, not fake toughness either. Just presence. There's something meaningful about another motorcycle beside you on a long Appalachian road. A quiet reminder that you aren't traveling entirely alone through life. That matters more than people admit, especially now. Because despite being more digitally connected than ever before, modern people often seem profoundly isolated. Real community is weakening. Trust is weakening. Families are fractured. Churches struggle. Friendships become increasingly shallow. And isolated people become spiritually vulnerable. I think that's part of why Scripture repeatedly emphasizes fellowship, community, and accountability. Human beings were never meant to carry existence entirely alone. Even Christ surrounded himself with people. The road eventually began opening towards broader stretches of mountain landscape again. Sunlight cut through clouds above the ridgelines while creeks wound quietly beneath the roads. Peaceful, quiet, and still. It's almost impossible to reconcile scenery like this with the violence once buried here. But maybe that tension itself contains wisdom. Beauty does not erase brokenness. Brokenness does not erase beauty. Both exist simultaneously in the human story. And maybe maturity is learning to acknowledge both honestly. Not cynical hopelessness, not naive optimism either. Truthful realism anchored by hope. I think Christianity at its best offers exactly that balance. Scripture never pretends humanity is perfect, but it also never abandons the possibility of redemption. That tension matters, because people desperately need hope right now. Real hope, not artificial positivity, not escapism. Hope grounded in truth. As the miles continued unfolding through Appalachia, I realized something simple. The road itself isn't the destination. Neither are the motorcycles. The deeper value is what the road creates space for. Reflection, conversation, perspective, gratitude, and stillness. And maybe even wisdom if a person is willing to listen carefully enough. That's part of why I think places like Shelton Laurel matter. Not because people should endlessly dwell on tragedy, but because remembering history humbles us. It reminds us how desperately human beings need mercy, humility, and truth. And maybe these mountain roads still have something to teach people willing to slow down enough to hear it. If you've stayed with me this long, I really appreciate it. Please hit that subscribe button, mash down that like button, and join me on our next adventure. Jarhead Jed signing off.